I am a 30-year-old man, and my wife Claire is also 30. We met almost a decade ago in college and have shared what I believed was a happy and healthy marriage. Both of us were thriving in our careers and eagerly awaiting the arrival of our first baby. Life seemed perfect until a few weeks ago. It all started on what was supposed to be a celebratory night, my 30th birthday. Claire had planned a special dinner at a fancy restaurant. She looked stunning in her dress, and her baby bump was just starting to show, filling me with pride and excitement for the future we were building together. We had spent hours talking about the nursery, picking out names, and dreaming about becoming parents. Claire had even shared her desire to leave her job to be a full-time mom, a plan I wholeheartedly supported as we were financially stable enough for one of us to stay home. However, in the days leading up to my birthday dinner, Claire had been unusually anxious. I chalked it up to hormonal changes and the stress of her demanding job. Her boss had been calling her in at odd hours and keeping her late. I trusted her completely and didn't think to question anything, believing we were both on the same page about this exciting new chapter in our lives. When we arrived at the restaurant, I was filled with anticipation. We had chosen a place we hadn't visited in years, a spot filled with wonderful memories. Just as we started our appetizers, a man approached our table. He was dressed in a suit and held a thick manila envelope. I was confused about why he was coming to us, but Claire stiffened immediately, her eyes fixed on the envelope like it was a ticking time bomb. The man addressed her, "Are you Claire Adams?" She hesitated for a moment before nodding, her voice barely audible as she confirmed her identity. The dread on her face was unmistakable, and a chill ran through me as I watched her reaction. Without another word, the man placed the envelope on the table in front of her and said, "You've been served. You are required to appear as a witness in the divorce trial of John and Emily Saunders." Then he turned and walked away, leaving me in stunned silence. My heart raced as I tried to process what had just happened. I expected Claire to laugh it off, to dismiss it as a mistake or some kind of misunderstanding. Instead, she sat there frozen, her eyes wide and her hands trembling as she stared at the envelope. I urged Claire to open the envelope, my concern growing by the second. With trembling hands, she tore it open, her face turning pale as she read its contents. She revealed that her boss's wife, Emily, had made allegations against several women in the office, accusing them of being involved with her husband. To my shock, Claire was among those named. Emily suspected infidelity, claiming her husband was sleeping around and implicating Claire as one of the culprits. My mind spun with disbelief. Claire worked for the man. How could she possibly be involved in something so scandalous? She shook her head, avoiding my gaze, and insisted she didn't know what the accusations were about. She said it must be a misunderstanding. Her response only deepened my confusion and unease. The more I listened, the harder it became to silence the pounding in my chest. I desperately wanted to believe her, especially since she was pregnant and we were building a life together. But in hindsight, I couldn't ignore the nagging doubts that began creeping in. Her long hours at work, the weekends spent at the office. It all began to feel suspicious. As we drove home from the restaurant, the silence between us was heavy and oppressive. I kept glancing at her, hoping for some kind of explanation or reassurance, but she simply stared out the window, lost in thought. Weeks passed, and every time I brought up the court case, she brushed it off, claiming it was just a formality and had nothing to do with her. But the more she avoided the topic, the more my suspicions grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something from me. Finally, I reached a breaking point. I needed answers, and I couldn't wait for her to provide them. In a moment of determination, I decided to attend the trial myself. Claire had insisted she wanted to handle it alone, but her repeated pushbacks only fueled my resolve. That morning, I took a half-day off work and drove to the courthouse, my heart pounding with apprehension. I planned to blend in unnoticed, but as soon as I entered the courtroom, I felt the weight of several surprised gazes. Among them was Claire's. The look of shock on her face spoke volumes, sending a jolt of fear and dread through me. I sat down in the courtroom, a heavy weight settling in my chest. The air was thick with tension, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to uncover something devastating. The case unfolded much quicker than I had anticipated. It became clear that there was far more happening behind the scenes than I had imagined. The central issue revolved around an infidelity clause being pushed by Emily, who had taken an aggressive stance against her husband and the women she believed were involved. The courtroom atmosphere became charged when Emily revealed that she had hired a private investigator to gather evidence. What followed was a series of damning revelations. The evidence presented included photographs and videos that were both shocking and humiliating. These visuals implicated 3 women in various indiscretions. As the judge reviewed the material, it became clear that Claire was the only one from her office involved. The other 2 women were part of the couple's social circle. When it came time to testify, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted dramatically. Each of the 3 women was summoned to speak about their relationship with Claire's boss. Graphic details emerged as they described their involvement, painting a picture I was wholly unprepared to face. The air in the courtroom was thick with emotion. Claire, sitting nearby, responded to the judge's questions with tears streaming down her face. My heart sank as I watched her pain unfold, the reality of our crumbling relationship crashing over me like a tidal wave. The judge probed deeply, asking about hotel stays, times, and dates. Each confirmation from Claire felt like a dagger to my chest. But nothing could have prepared me for the next revelation. When the judge inquired if she was the person in the photographs presented as evidence, Claire hesitated, her voice trembling as she admitted it was her. In that moment, it felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath me, shattering everything I believed about our life together. Then came the worst moment of all. A video was played, one that only Claire and the judge could see. I watched in horror as Claire broke down, unable to bear what she was witnessing. She sobbed uncontrollably and ultimately admitted that she was in the video with her boss. The judge's voice broke through the haze of my disbelief, asking Claire if she recognized herself in the images. After a long pause, she finally whispered, "Yes." Hearing her cry out my name, her face contorted in horror, and her voice pleading for me to let her explain felt like a dagger twisting in my heart. Overwhelmed, I stood up, my legs weak and shaking from the adrenaline coursing through me. I couldn't bear to listen anymore. I turned and walked out of the courtroom, each step echoing in the silence. Claire's desperate sobs and pleas faded behind me as I pushed through the doors into the cool air outside. In the weeks that followed, I isolated myself from Claire, staying with friends and family. I needed space to think, to process the betrayal that had cut me so deeply. She begged for a chance to explain, but I couldn't even look at her. The thought of her infidelity consumed me, and I felt trapped in a fog of confusion and pain. One night, I awoke in a cold sweat, fixating on the baby she was carrying. My mind raced with questions. Did the affair begin before or after she got pregnant? Was the child even mine? The uncertainty gnawed at me until I confronted Claire, demanding a prenatal DNA test. She resisted at first but eventually agreed when I suggested I might consider staying if the baby turned out to be mine. Weeks later, I sat at the kitchen table, trembling as I opened the sealed envelope containing the test results. My heart sank as I read the words. The probability of paternity is 0%. A numb silence enveloped me. The baby I had dreamed about, the family I had envisioned, it was never meant to be mine. It was as if I had been living a nightmare. With a heavy heart, I drove back to our house. I found Claire sitting on the bed, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up at me, a flicker of hope in her gaze. Without a word, I tossed the paternity results onto the bed. My voice was flat as I said, "It's not mine." Her face crumpled as she buried it in her hands, sobbing. Claire pleaded with me, apologizing through shaky breaths and reaching out for me. But I stepped back, shaking my head. "No, Claire, it's too late. You lied to me. You betrayed me. You expect me to forgive you and raise another man's baby." Her cries intensified, but I turned away. "I'm divorcing you," I stated, the finality of my words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. "I can't live with this anymore." I walked out of the room, my heart feeling as though it had shattered into a million pieces. Outside, I broke down for the first time in weeks, crying uncontrollably as the reality of my situation hit me. Claire's betrayal had destroyed everything, the love, the trust, the future we had envisioned together. The divorce itself was straightforward. After Claire's affair became public, her boss's wife's lawyer contacted me, offering the incriminating video evidence. Claire tried to contest the divorce, but the courts denied her request. I walked away from the last 10 years of my life, leaving behind the memories and the dreams we had shared. I have since moved on, but Claire remains a single mother, still living in the house we bought together. I chose to take more cash from our savings to ensure she could raise the baby in a stable environment. As for Claire's affair partner, he eventually faced consequences for his actions. Let's just say he spent some time recovering in the hospital a few months later.